Hey everyone, welcome back to English 111 here at Delta College. This is week 5, and we're talking about the next assignment, which is the report essay. So let's go ahead and dive into this. There's going to be a lot of clicking around this time and looking at different articles. Okay, so a report seeks to inform the reader about whatever the subject or topic is. So the idea is it has to answer what we call the reporter's questions, which are who, what, when, where, why, and how. These are called the reporter's questions because if you look at newspaper reports, or probably television reports as well, they always strive to answer those questions as quickly as possible. Now, in the case of newspapers, the editors know that readers probably aren't going to read the entire article. They're only going to look at the headline, and if the headline interests them, they'll read the first paragraph or so to see if they want to read further. So that first or second paragraph, that beginning has to answer as many of these questions as possible so that the reader can get the quick hit of information that they need to know. So, in the beginning, a report tries to answer those questions. As an example, let's take a look at the Steve Silberman article, which I've linked on e-learning. Neurodiversity rewires conventional thinking about brains. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. See if I'm bringing it up here. Here we go. Okay. Excuse me. Steve Silberman, April 16th, 2013. So it's not necessarily a recent article, but it's really uh, a current article in that it has the most up-to-date information. But we'll talk more about that later on today. Neurodiversity rewires conventional thinking about brains, and this comes from Wired magazine from their website. In the late 1990s, a sociologist named Judy Singer, who is on the autism spectrum herself, invented a new word to describe conditions like autism, dyslexia, and ADHD: neurodiversity. In a radical stroke, she hoped to shift the focus of discourse about atypical ways of thinking and learning away from the usual litany of deficits, disorders, and impairments. Echoing positive terms like biodiversity and cultural diversity, her neologism called attention to the fact that many atypical forms of brain wiring also convey unusual skills and aptitudes. So, what is going on here? In terms of the who, it's a sociologist named Judy Singer. What did she do? She coined a new term or neologism. Neologism means new word called neurodiversity. Why did she do that? She wanted to destigmatize uh, neural conditions which are usually looked at negatively or that have a negative connotation to them. And instead of saying that those are deficits or impairments, they're just different ways of thinking. How did she do that? She came up with this new word which echoes positive terms like biodiversity and cultural diversity. When did she do that? In the late 1990s. So that answers many of those questions: the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how. So that's what a report needs to do. Oh, the where. The term first appeared in Atlantic magazine. Okay, reports versus editorials. Now, like I said, the purpose of a report is to be informative. It is not to persuade. Editorials are meant to persuade. And this can get really tricky, especially now since most people get their news from online sources or from cable news outlets. there is a blending of what is meant to be informative with what is meant to be persuasive. And so it becomes difficult sometimes to tell the difference between the two. And ultimately, to tell the difference, you have to think about what is the goal of this piece of writing. Is it meant to inform or trying to inform, or is it trying to persuade? And so you'll find a lot of pieces that are meant to be informative will be using some of the tactics of persuasion. That is, they'll use opinions, while pieces that are meant to be persuasive will often use material that's meant to be informative. So let's take a look at these two articles. Witness, driver and crash admitted texting before collision, and editorial, Texas failure to outlaw texting while driving costs more lives. Now, the titles, especially the second title, should tell you that that is an editorial, so its primary purpose is meant to be persuasive. So that gives you a big clue as to what you're dealing with. But let's just go a little bit further into these articles and see if we can look at the way that they're constructed in order to be able to see, come on now, how they've been put together in order to persuade or inform. Okay. So this first one, Witness, driver in crash admitted texting before collision, by Juan A. Lozano, April 1st of 2017. This comes from AP News, AP meaning Associated Press. Dateline Houston, AP, Associated Press. The driver of a pickup truck that collided with a church minibus in rural Texas, killing 13 people, apologized after the crash and acknowledged he had been texting while driving, a witness said Friday. Jody Kukler, I believe, told the Associated Press he was driving behind the truck and had seen it moving erratically prior to the Wednesday collision on a two-lane road about 75 miles west, or 120 kilometers, of San Antonio, near the town of Concan, I guess. Kukler said the truck had crossed the center line several times while he followed it. Kukler, 55, a self-employed welder, said he and his girlfriend were driving back to their home in the nearby town of Leakey when he came across a truck that was driving erratically across the road. And now the rest of the article goes on to elaborate on the information that was presented in the introduction. So you can see from the introduction here that the information is only factual. It's fact-based as opposed to opinionated. When it does include opinions, it's in the form of quotations where the witness or the people who have been interviewed are offering their own opinions. But you'll notice that the writer keeps his opinions out of it and sticks strictly to the facts. And what are those facts? Who is it? Jody Kukler is a witness to this crash. What did he do? He witnessed the crash. And the other what is there was this crash that happened in Houston, or in Texas anyway. When did this happen? This happened, or at least this was reported on April 1st, and it happened on the Wednesday prior to that, whenever that was. Where? 75 miles west of San Antonio. So on and so forth. So again, it is trying to answer those questions, the reporter's questions. And then this other article, which is editorial, Texas failure to outlaw texting while driving costs more lives. This is dealing with the same issue, the same events, but it is looking at it from a different angle or a different direction. Okay. Excuse me. This comes from Longview News Journal, so another newspaper, April 1st, 2017, so the same day as the other article. It is a chilling piece of video, one that makes very clear the deadly reality of texting while driving. Recorded with a cell phone by a passenger in a car that for miles was following Jack Dylan Young, it shows the pickup he was driving repeatedly drifting onto the shoulder and across the highway center line. The fact that it appears distracted driving eventually led to 13 deaths when Young's truck again crossed the center line into the path of an oncoming church van should send a very clear message to lawmakers and Governor Greg Abbott. It is well past time for Texas to outlaw this deadly practice, to tell motorists that while we believe in personal freedoms, a driver's freedom ends where it impacts others. So, right away, you should be able to tell this is a very different type of article because it's including these opinionated statements that has very loaded words. Remember, we had talked about how words have denotations and connotations, whereas denotations are the words' meanings, the definitions. The connotations are all of the ideas and feelings that we associate with the word. So this is using loaded language such as chilling, deadly, impacts. So words that have strong and negative connotations. And even though it does contain factual information here, the fact that it appears distracted driving eventually led to 13 deaths, it's presented in a way that is meant to be persuasive. So for this assignment, the report that you're writing, you need to be focusing on being informative as opposed to persuasive. You can still use opinionated statements, but your goal needs to inform the reader about your subject or about your topic and not persuade them about it. Okay. Let's hop back over here now. Okay. So that comes to evaluating sources. Now, for your report, you are probably going to do a little bit of research. You don't have to, but in order to make your report as informative as possible, you're probably going to have to look up some information. And this isn't a research-oriented course. That's what English 112 focuses more on. But you should get a little bit of experience with conducting research in here. And when it comes to conducting research, you have to be able to evaluate sources because not every source is going to be reliable or credible, especially if you're dealing with what you find on the internet. So you have to be able to evaluate. And as we know, we make evaluations according to specific criteria. So I want you to pause this video and take a look at this other video, which I've linked on eLearning, which comes from the Modesto Junior College Library on the CRAP test. So pause here and go watch that. Okay, so the CRAP test. CRAP is the criteria that you will use when it comes to evaluating sources. CRAP is an acronym, which means that each letter of the word is the initial for another word. In this case, currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and point of view. So currency refers to how up to date the information is, not necessarily how recent it is. Recency just refers to how close to you in time the information is. That doesn't necessarily make it current. Current is up to date or as up to date as possible. So as they point out in the video, it's entirely possible for an article or a source to not be recent, but it is possible for it to still be current. So if you're researching the 1980s, for example, then looking at material from the 1980s would be appropriate. So currency means up to date. Relevance. How relevant is the information to you and your topic, but also does the source stay on topic? Or does it go off on tangents, provide information that's not relevant? Authority refers to how expert the information is. or what is the expertise and credibility of the author? What are the author's credentials? Or if the author, if it's not sure who the author is or not clear who the author is, then what about the source itself? Where does the information appear? If it's in a website, what is the authority of the website? Accuracy is being correct. Is the information presented by the source correct and verifiable? And does it cite its own sources that you can go and look up and uh, verify the accuracy of? And finally, point of view. Is the source biased or not? Is it trying to promote an agenda or something? Uh, is there a slant to the information? Now, all information is going to be slanted in some way. That's more or less unavoidable. But you can work to minimize how much slant or bias there is in it. So, to practice evaluating sources, let's take a look at a couple other articles that I've linked on eLearning. This first one comes from the Variety website. Jessica Chastain, Chelsea Clinton, Sherry Redstone, Gayle King among honorees of Variety's Power of Women New York. So let me just bring this up here. So again, this comes from the Variety websites. It's written by the Variety staff, which doesn't tell us a whole much about it. We don't know who the exact writers are. And it comes from March 20th, 2017. Okay. So what does it say? Variety has chosen to honor Jessica Chastain, Chelsea Clinton, Gayle King, Blake Lively, Audra McDonald, and Sherry Redstone at its annual Power of Women New York luncheon on April 21st. The event at Cipriani Midtown will be hosted by Vanessa Bayer of Saturday Night Live. The 6 women have been selected as Variety's Impact honorees for their humanitarian work. Each of the recipients will be featured on a cover of the magazine's upcoming issue, which hit stands on April 18th. The Power of Women New York event, produced in partnership with Lifetime Entertainment, is tied to the annual New York Women's Impact Report, which profiles women who made a significant impact in entertainment and media in the past year. Okay, now let's go through and apply the CRAP criteria to this. The currency. This comes from March 20th of 2017, so it's fairly recent, but that doesn't necessarily make it current. You can say that it's current to the time in which it's looking at the 2017 luncheon to honor these women put on by Variety. The luncheon would be, or was rather, on April 21st of 2017. So this is about a month before. So you can argue that it's reasonably current to the time period, but if this is an annual event, as the article states, then other events have been held after this. So it's not the most recent or the most current information about the annual event, but it is current to the time period. Okay, so that criterion is a little shaky, but you can say it's fairly. I would say that it meets that criteria fairly well. The next one, relevancy. Now, we didn't read the entire article, but it seems to stay on topic. And if you're researching events honoring women of the past few years or so, then this would be relevant to your research. Okay, so it passes that one. What about the authority? That's a little shaky too, because it's written by the Variety staff. There isn't a specific person who is associated with the writing of this article, so we can't check that person's credentials. But we can check the credentials of the source, which is Variety. What do we know about Variety? Well, let me see if we can find some information about the source itself. Let's see. Often websites will have a section that is dedicated to about. So here we go, about Variety. So if you're not familiar with Variety, you can go and look it up and find a little bit more information. About us, Variety is the most authoritative and trusted source of entertainment business news, reaching an audience of affluent influencers. For 113 years, influential producers, executives, and talent in entertainment have turned to Variety for expert film, TV, digital, music, and theater business analysis and insights. In addition to the weekly magazine and website, the venerable brand has a brand marketing arm, Variety Content Studio, that produces premium custom content as well as a thriving editorial features division. With over 4 million social followers, four podcast series, a two-time Emmy-winning television series, 70 events and summits, Variety remains the vital read in global entertainment. So even though this information is coming from a biased source, Variety itself, we can look it up and see that, okay, it's been around for over 100 years. It seems highly regarded. It's won Emmys and major awards. So that tells us something about the credibility or the credentials of the source. This seems like a fairly reliable source. Okay. How about the accuracy of the information? Well, we would have to do a little bit more information or a little bit more research rather to test the facts and information presented here in order to see if it's accurate, but we've no reason to doubt it. So that's encouraging. And finally, the point of view. Well, there is some bias here. And like I said, everything is going to be biased to some extent. And this is biased in the sense that Variety is reporting on their own event. So they have a vested interest in presenting it in a positive way. But the information is not opinionated. It is presented in a very factual way, a very informative way. So we can say that it does try to minimize its bias, even though it is, of course, there. So we could say this article passes the majority of the CRAP criteria and would be something that is reliable or usable in a research project. This other article, Chelsea Clinton to receive Lifetime Impact Award for some reason. Okay, there should be a red flag from that headline right away, and that there is an opinion which is being implied there that Chelsea Clinton isn't worthy of receiving this award, or it's questioning her worthiness. This is by Chuck Ross, investigative reporter from the Daily Caller, March 22, 2017. So this is approximately the same time frame as the previous article. I think this is about 2 days later. Chelsea Clinton is set to receive a Lifetime Impact Award from Variety magazine and Lifetime next month, though it is unclear why. The former first daughter will be honored at a Power of Women luncheon on April 21st, Variety announced. Jessica Chastain, Gayle King, Blake Lively, Audra McDonald, and Sherry Redstone will also receive the awards. Okay, so it's pretty much the same information so far presented in the other article, although it's focusing on Chelsea Clinton as opposed to the women in general. Clinton, a 37-year-old mother of two, is receiving the award, quote, for her work with Alliance for a Healthier Generation, which empowers kids to develop lifelong healthy habits, unquote, Variety says in a statement. Okay, so it provides a quotation and a source for it. The Alliance for a Healthier Generation, which helps fight childhood obesity, is affiliated with the Clinton Foundation, where Clinton serves as vice chair. Okay, factual information. Clinton's other achievements include being born to one of the most skilled politicians in American history, growing up in the White House, landing a $600,000 contract with MSNBC, marrying a hedge fund millionaire, and tweeting constantly about President Trump. Not relevant information, is it? So that goes off topic. Correction. This article initially referred to Clinton's award as a Lifetime Achievement Award Instead, it is a Lifetime Impact Award issued by Variety and Lifetime, the cable television channel. The headline and article have been edited for accuracy. Okay, that's not encouraging, because even though it does acknowledge that the information was originally inaccurate and they have since corrected it, it does raise the point that they originally went to press with this article that had incorrect information. And in fact, it's kind of funny, the mistake that they made, and that they thought she was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award as opposed to an award from the Lifetime Cable Network. Okay, so inaccurate information, or at least initially, so it doesn't pass the test of accuracy. The currency is the same as the other article, so you can say, okay, it's as current as the other article is. The relevance, it does go off topic, so that's not helpful. The authority, Chuck Ross. Okay, we have someone who has attached his name to the article. What do we know about Chuck Ross? Let's see if we can click on his name and see if we can learn a little bit more about him. Chuck Ross is a reporter at the Daily Caller. Okay, that tells us nothing. So that's not encouraging. What about the Daily Caller? What do we know about them? Well, let's see if there is an about page. And nothing is coming up, although that could be because of the computer itself. See if we can scroll down to the bottom. Okay. About Us. Founded in 2010 by Tucker Carlson, a 20-year veteran journalist, and Neil Patel, a former chief policy advisor to Vice President Cheney, the Daily Caller is one of America's largest and fastest growing news publications. Our team of experienced full-time reporters and editors works around the clock to deliver award-winning original reporting, in-depth investigations, entertainment, thought-provoking commentary, and up-to-the-second breaking news. Jump down a little bit more. The Daily Caller's reporters are credentialed members of the U.S. Senate and House press galleries. We also provide comprehensive coverage of the executive branch with a dedicated White House correspondent and membership in the White House Correspondents Association. Additionally, the Daily Caller is a member of the White House in-town press pool, responsible for dispatching reports to the global press at White House events on a monthly basis. This doesn't really tell us a whole lot. It says that they are credentialed members of the U.S. Senate and House press galleries. Okay. But who specifically are the reporters? From what we can tell, Chuck Ross, he's just a reporter. We don't know what his credentials are, and that's not being specified here. What we do see is that the people who are associated with the sites are conservative leaning, and we see that in the article itself, and there is a very clear bias being presented. And then, as of the time that I'm recording this, it came out fairly recently that many of the people who write and report for the Daily Caller are actually white supremacists, or rather, they have a history of writing for blogs that are in favor of white supremacy. So all of those factors together, not encouraging. We cannot view this source as reliable, and therefore we wouldn't be able to use this in a research project unless we wanted to write about conservative blogs. Perhaps we could use this as a reliable source for that, but otherwise for an academic piece of writing, it wouldn't be very helpful. Okay, so the previous article passes most of the CRAP criteria and is therefore reliable. This article really does not, so you wouldn't be able to use this. And so that brings us to the next step that we have to consider when it comes to report writing, Logic and fallacies. We have to be able to avoid falling into logical fallacies for two reasons. One, our writing, especially in the academic arena, is meant to be well reasoned and well supported. And so if you fall into using fallacies or false reasoning or places where your reasoning breaks down, then that's going to reflect poorly on you. We also have to be able to look for logic and fallacies in our research because, again, if our sources are illogical or fallacious, then that's not going to work well. So there are two basic types of logical reasoning, which are deductive and inductive, and they work sort of in opposite ways. Deductive reasoning moves from general to specific, whereas inductive moves from specific to general. So deduction takes general information and then tests it by applying it to a specific situation. The classic example, and I've probably mentioned this before, the classic example of deductive reasoning is the syllogism, which takes a couple premises and from those extrapolates a specific conclusion. So all humans are mortal. Socrates was human, therefore Socrates was mortal. So you take that general truth and you test it by looking at a specific example. Inductive reasoning moves in the opposite direction. It takes specific details and from those extrapolates a larger, more general conclusion. So if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, based on the available evidence, it's probably a duck. That's the way induction works. Now, if your conclusion makes sense and follows from the evidence, then you could say that that is a valid reasoning. If the evidence is true, then you could say that it's sound reasoning. So valid reasoning is when you reach a conclusion based on the available evidence in a way that makes sense. And if you're valid and the evidence you have is true and verifiable, then it's sound. So it's possible to have reasoning that is valid without being sound, because validity is just reaching a conclusion based on the available evidence. Soundness is making sure that the evidence is verifiable and true. So again, it's possible to have information or reasoning that's valid but unsound. It is not possible to have reasoning that is unsound and valid. So some of the common fallacies, and I've posted a handout on this as well. There are many fallacies out there, but these are the most common ones that people come across. So ad hominem, get used to the Latin here, which means to the man, is a personal attack that is meant to destroy your opponent's credibility. So you're not attacking your opponent's argument or position, you're attacking the opponent directly. So it's name calling. You know, you can't trust this person because they're ugly or something like that. Ad misericordiam means to the pity. This is kind of a form of distraction where you are using emotional manipulation. So instead of presenting an argument in a rational and logical way, you're using some emotion to distract from it. Let me think if I can come up with an example. Yeah, maybe I robbed a bank, but you have to keep in mind that I'm from a really poor family and I need to feed my family. So that would be an example of ad misericordiam. Ad populum, or to the people, is an appeal to public pressure or prejudice. So, because something is popular with the people, it must be good. So this, let's say, this product is more popular or sells more units than this other similar product does. Therefore, the first product is better because it's more popular, which isn't necessarily true. Just because something is popular doesn't make it right or good. Bandwagon. This is where people use social or peer pressure. Everyone's doing it, so you should too. You should vote for this candidate because everyone is voting for that candidate. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the best candidate or the one that you agree with or like the most, but because the candidate is popular, so it's similar to ad populum, because everyone's doing it, you should too. Begging the question, this one gets confusing. Begging the question is when you reach a conclusion based on an unproven premise. So let me think of an example. Video games contain a lot of violence, so you need to protect children from playing video games. There is an assumption being made there that children shouldn't be exposed to violence in the media, and therefore, because it's bad for them, they should not play video games. So, begging the question is when you reach a conclusion based on an unproven assumption, or there is an assumption which is implied in the situation. Dicto simplicator, to speak simply, is an oversimplification of an issue. Exercise is good for you, so you should exercise. Well, exercise is generally good for people, but not for everyone. So there are other, factors which aren't being considered. So you're oversimplifying the issue. False analogy. An analogy is a comparison of two things that behave or function in the same way. So there is some sort of logical relationship between the two. A false analogy is when the two things that you're comparing are not related at all. So let me think of an example. Here's one which I think I've included on that handout. Um, let's say you have a bowl of Skittles and three of them are poisoned and will kill you. Well, that's what the Syrian refugee crisis is like. That's an actual analogy, which was posted online. And it's a false analogy because, of course, people and refugees are not the same thing as candy. They're quite different things. They don't relate to each other at all. False dichotomy or black and white. This is where you present uh, a situation in which it's an either or situation where there's no alternatives or you ignore the alternatives. So it's one way or the other. It's my way or the highway, as they say. If you're not with us, then you're against us. Well, it's a false dichotomy because there are other options, other variables, which you're just completely ignoring. It's not a black and white situation. Hasty generalization is when you reach a conclusion based on too limited a sample of data. For example, you could say that restaurant is bad because I got sick the last time I ate there. Okay, just because you got sick on one occasion doesn't mean that it's, first of all, the restaurant's fault. And even if it was, then that doesn't mean that the restaurant is bad. Just on one situation or one occasion, it wasn't good. So hasty generalization, generalizing from too little information. Non sequitur, it does not follow. So the conclusion has nothing to do with the evidence at all. It goes in a completely different direction. So you can't trust this person because the sky is blue. Has nothing to do. One thing doesn't have anything to do with the other. So that's the non sequitur. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. After it, therefore because of it, is the fallacy of false cause. This is when you say, well, this happened, and then later on this other thing happened. Well, that first thing must have been the cause of the second thing. And that's not necessarily the case. They may not be related at all. So let's say you raise the speed limits, and then there's an increase in traffic accidents. Is it because the the increase in traffic accidents, was that caused by raising the speed limit? You don't know. There's probably some correlation, but it's probably you can't definitive link one as causing the other. So that's the post hoc fallacy. The red herring is the use of misdirection to distract. It's sort of the hey, look over there. I'm not the problem. Look at what's going on over here. That's the real problem. So we shouldn't worry about pollution because terrorism is a much bigger problem. So let's focus on that. Well, you're distracting or misdirecting people into looking at uh, something else in order to distract them from the current situation. That's the red herring. Slippery slope. This is where you say if you allow something to happen, it will result in a chain reaction that will end in catastrophe. So if you allow this to happen, then this other thing's going to happen, and then this other thing's going to happen. It's that classic children's story of, if you give a mouse a cookie, it's going to end up taking over your house. Probably not. That's the slippery slope. And then the straw man. And like I said, there are more examples than just these, but these are the most common ones. The straw man is when you misrepresent your opponent's position. So instead of attacking your opponent directly, you create a false representation of your opponent and attack that instead. So it's the scarecrow effect. So, my opponent opposes, I don't know, opposes everything that we believe in. Probably not true, but by creating this boogeyman, if you will, you're able to attack that instead of the opponent directly. So you're misrepresenting what your opponent stands for. Okay, so let's take a look at this Facebook post and identify how many fallacies are present. So just take a moment to read this and try to count how many fallacies you see. So I see about 5 fallacies here. Okay, rant. For those fast food employees striking for $15 an hour, let's do some math. At $15 an hour, Johnny Fryboy would make $31,200 annually. Okay, so we see ad hominem by attacking, name calling people who advocate for raising the minimum wage. An E1 private in the military makes $18,378. An E5 sergeant with 8 years of service only makes $35,067 annually. So you're telling me, Sally McBurger Flipper, that you deserve as much as those kids getting shot at, deploying for months in hostile environments, and putting their collective asses on the line every day, protecting your unskilled butt. Okay, so there's a false analogy here, comparing minimum wage workers to service members. There is a big difference there, which is not being expressed. For example, service members receive extra compensation in the form of housing and health care and these other benefits that minimum wage workers do not. So not only is that a false analogy, there's begging the question going on here, and that you're reaching a conclusion based on an unproven assumption. There's straw man, because this is misrepresenting advocates for raising the minimum wage, what their position is. They're not saying that they deserve as much as service members do. That's a misrepresentation. Here's the deal, Baconator. You are working in a job designed for a kid in high school who is learning how to work and earning enough for gas and hanging out with her equally goofy high school pals. If you have chosen this as your lifelong profession, you have failed. So there is some ad populum going on here. The belief that minimum wage jobs are for teenagers, and they're working. The people who work those jobs are teenagers, which actually the facts do not represent. But that's another issue. That's beyond what we're talking about here. If you don't want minimum wage, don't have minimum skills. Okay, so there's, like I said, at least five fallacies going on here. Now, there are valid arguments that could be made against raising the minimum wage. There definitely are. This is not one of them. This is completely fallacious. So, the assignment for this week is to write a report. Identify a controversial topic you would love to know more about, choosing one that has at least two clearly defined and disputed sides. Do the necessary research to find out much more about the controversy, narrowing the matter down to manageable size for a paper or oral presentation. Then either prepare a written version of the report to submit to your instructor or an oral version to share with a wider audience. In this case, because we're dealing with an online class, you really have to go with with the paper instead. Can't really do an oral presentation. Explain the controversy without taking sides. So, I would say let's broaden this a little bit more and think about whatever topic that you want to learn more about. What is it that you want to know more about? You can look at whatever the current debates and controversies are within your field of study, or you can take a topic that's really interests you and you just want to learn more about it. And this is your chance to educate people about that topic. So present the information, do research if you have to, although if it's a topic of which you already have expertise, then you don't have to worry about doing the research. But just the idea is you're trying to inform your audience about whatever your topic is. So present the information, teach your audience about whatever your topic is. This is your chance to be the teacher. The first draft is due at the end of this week. And then the final draft will be due at the end of next week. Okay, so that's it for this week. Next week, we'll have our next revision and editing lesson, and then we will move on from there. So, as always, take care, have fun, and be excellent to each other.